Have you ever walked beneath a bridge at dusk and felt how the air shifts? The open world above hums with footsteps, wagons, and voices, but below the arches the sounds are swallowed. The wind quiets, the light dims, and the stone holds a coolness that feels both protective and uneasy. For centuries, bridges offered travelers a place to pause, a roof of stone or timber overhead, shelter from rain, and a surface to lean against when weariness pressed too hard. Yet those who rested there knew the truth. What seemed like safety often carried hidden dangers. Hello everyone, and welcome. In this story, we will explore the forgotten risks of sleeping under bridges, places that promised rest but often brought unease. If you enjoy these calm journeys through the past, I gently remind you to subscribe, so more of these quiet histories can reach you each night. For the weary traveler, a bridge seemed like an obvious refuge. Roads led naturally toward them. Rivers demanded their crossings, and beneath their arches the elements were soft. Rain struck stone instead of skin. Wind passed over instead of through, and shadows offered cover from watchful eyes. Imagine walking for hours in mud, your cloak heavy with damp, only to find an arch where the ground is drier. Would you not be tempted to stop, to drop your bundle, to let your eyes close? Many did, and many learned, sometimes too late, that a bridge's comfort was deceptive. The first danger was sound. Beneath the arch of a bridge, every noise grew louder. The crunch of bread, the slosh of water, the shifting of cloth, all echoed against stone. Have you ever clapped in a tunnel and felt the sound return to you stronger than when it left? Under bridges, the same rule applied. Even small noises spread outward, carrying into the night, betraying the sleeper's presence to anyone passing above or wandering near the riverbank. Travelers who thought themselves hidden discovered that their rest was marked by sound they could not control. The second danger was water. Rivers did not always flow gently. A sudden rain upstream could swell them without warning, and waters that seemed calm at dusk could surge by midnight. Travelers who slept too near the edge sometimes woke to cold rushing against their packs, or worse, found themselves dragged half asleep toward currents stronger than their limbs. Stories passed along roads warned of those who never woke in time, their belongings found snagged against branches downstream. Even those who survived carried the memory of water's unpredictability, and they seldom trusted bridges again. But perhaps the greatest danger lay in people. Bridges were not solitary structures. They were crossings, places where footsteps gathered, where wagons rattled, where traders, soldiers, and wanderers all converged. To rest beneath one was to lie in the path of countless strangers. Some ignored sleepers. Others looked twice, and a few saw in them easy opportunity. A man asleep under stone was a man whose eyes could not guard his pack, whose ears could not catch approaching steps. Even if no theft occurred, the fear lingered, that anyone above could lean over the side and watch without being seen. Have you ever felt uneasy, not because someone was near, but because they might be? That was the weight of sleeping under a bridge. The stone above felt heavy, not only in structure, but in uncertainty. Who might be walking just beyond hearing? Who might glance down? Who might descend the bank before dawn? Every creak, every step, every trickle of water magnified that worry. Travelers learned to adapt. Some slept lightly, one eye half open, ears tuned to the hollow acoustics around them. Others set small traps of stones or twigs near their resting place, so a careless step would give warning. Companions divided watches, though the echoing space made it hard to tell if a sound was near or far. And many, despite their exhaustion, chose not to sleep fully at all, preferring restless dozing to the risk of vulnerability. Even the ground carried dangers. Bridges often stood where roads met rivers, and where rivers gathered, so too did animals. Dogs sniffed along banks, searching for scraps. Foxes padded beneath arches, noses twitching. Rats nested in damp cracks, bold enough to steal crumbs from a sleeper's side. Larger beasts came too. Oxen led to water, horses crossing streams. A sleeper under the wrong arch could wake to hooves passing within reach. What felt like solitude was often only a thin veil over constant traffic, both human and animal. There was also the matter of trust in the structure itself. Bridges creaked, shifted, groaned under weight. In the dark, those sounds could mimic footsteps, leaving a sleeper uncertain whether danger approached or the stones simply spoke. Some feared collapse, especially with older timber bridges where rot and damp weakened supports. To rest beneath was to place one's life not only in fate but in construction, and though collapse was rare, the thought of tons of stone or wood above was enough to keep many awake. Yet still bridges tempted. They stood at the heart of travel, familiar, solid, promising respite from open skies. To those with no other shelter, the arch seemed better than none. And so night after night, weary travelers spread their cloaks upon the cold ground, closed their eyes, and hoped that the risks remained only whispers in the dark, because sleeping under bridges was never truly safe. The stones offered shade, but also echoed danger. The river soothed, but also threatened. The path above brought company, but also risk. And those who rested there carried into their dreams not only fatigue, but the knowledge that safety, like shadow, was thinner than it seemed. Have you ever stood near a river and felt how alive it seemed? Even when the surface looked calm, the water moved with hidden strength, carrying silt, sticks, and unseen weight beneath. By day, rivers invited travelers to drink, wash, or cool their tired feet. But by night, when weary bodies purled under bridges that crossed them, rivers could change from allies into enemies. To sleep so close to flowing water was to gamble against its moods, and not everyone woke to tell the gamble lost. Travelers often chose bridges for the very reason rivers frightened them. A bridge meant dry footing where a ford might fail, steady stone where banks grew slip, safety above currents that could sweep a body away. But those who slept beneath soon discovered that rivers had voices of their own, and those voices did not always whisper comfort. At dusk, the water seemed steady. By midnight, a storm miles upstream could swell it beyond measure. A sleeper who had laid their cloak too near the edge woke with their bedding soaked, their pack drifting, or worse, their body half pulled toward the surge. Have you ever watched a puddle fill quickly in the rain and felt a flicker of surprise at how fast water gathers? Now imagine that on a vast scale. Heavy rains far away meant rivers rose even where skies were clear. A traveler who fell asleep under still weather could not see the storm that brewed beyond hills. By the time the sound of rushing reached their ears, water already licked at their belongings. Some managed to scramble higher, clinging to stone or roots. Others, too drowsy or too burdened, did not. The river became their enemy, not by choice, but by chance. The ground beneath bridges carried warnings if one looked. Muddy patches where grass refused to grow marked where water had risen before. Strips of bark torn from trees told of currents that had dragged branches downstream. But a tired body rarely looked closely at such signs. Hunger and fatigue urged sleep more than caution urged patience. And so many laid down where water had claimed ground in seasons past. The river, patient and silent, waited for its moment. Even when it did not rise, the river still worked against sleepers. Its sound, constant and uneven, lulled some into deeper rest than they intended. The steady rush blurred other noises. Footsteps on the bank, whispers from above, the crack of twigs nearby. Have you ever tried to listen through the roar of heavy rain? A river at night muffled the world just as thoroughly. For a traveler, that meant blindness to danger. They believed themselves soothed, but they were only deafened. Animals knew the river's habits well. At night, creatures came to drink. Deer stepped softly down muddy paths. Foxes prowled the edges. Stray dogs followed scents. Even wolves were said to haunt certain crossings, their paws silent as they approached water. To sleep beneath a bridge was to place oneself in the path of thirsty mouths and cautious eyes. And though most animals avoided people, hunger sometimes drove them close. Bread left out, scraps unburied, or even the faint smell of dried meat could draw them in. To wake and find glowing eyes reflecting the last embers of a fire was a memory travelers carried with them long after. The river also brought chill. Stone held cold in its belly, and damp air rose from the water, seeping into clothes and bedding. Travelers who had walked dry and warm all day often woke shivering, their limbs stiff, their cloaks heavy with dew. Some said that the river stole warmth while one slept, drawing it out as surely as it pulled branches and leaves along its course. For those with weak health, the cold of river air could linger for days, turning aches into fevers. The enemy was not always violent flood. Sometimes it was the quiet theft of strength by water's breath. Companions learned tricks to defend against this. They laid branches beneath them as barriers, raising their bodies from the damp earth. They built small walls of stones to block spray. They chose higher ground under the arches, even if the floor was harder. But nothing truly silenced the river's power. Its voice still rose, echoing under stone, rattling in dreams, reminding sleepers that they lay in its reach. The greatest risk was not in the river's force, but in its unpredictability. A road might be counted in miles, a forest in trees, but a river shifted by season and storm. To trust, it was to trust chance. And travelers, though desperate for shelter, knew that chance was a poor guardian. They whispered lessons to each other on the road. Never sleep with your hand near water. Never tie your bag too low. Never forget that what looks still may not remain so. Have you ever had a friend who seemed calm until, in a moment, anger revealed itself? Rivers were like that friend. They carried calm faces above, but within, sudden moods. A person lulled into trust was betrayed when currents rose without warning. And when danger came, it came swiftly, giving no time to gather belongings, no time to warn companions, no time to climb. So the river, beneath bridges, became more than scenery. It became an adversary, one whose strength could not be fought. Travelers who survived its moods carried respect for it ever after. They knew that the last place to rest should often be the first place to fear, because what looked like a shelter's gift, a bridge over water, was in truth a test. And too often the river beneath proved itself no friend, but a silent enemy, waiting for those too weary to judge its patience. Have you ever walked through a town or along a road and noticed how certain spots seem to attract people, even when they have no reason to linger? A shaded corner, a market stall, a bench near water. They draw figures who pause, who watch, who wait. Bridges, too, had such a pull. Their arches gave shade by day and concealment by night, and those qualities invited not only weary travelers, but also strangers whose reasons for lingering were not always simple. For those who chose to sleep beneath bridges, the presence of such strangers became one of the greatest dangers of all. Bridges were crossroads in more than one sense. They carried carts and riders across rivers. They linked villages and towns, and they stood as landmarks where people naturally gathered. But beneath them, where arches created hidden spaces, a different sort of gathering often occurred. Men seeking rest, women seeking shelter, wanderers avoiding attention, all found their way there. Sometimes their presence was harmless, a matter of need. Other times their eyes watched too closely, their steps shifted too near, their silence pressed too long. Have you ever felt a stranger's gaze linger when you wished it would pass? That was the feeling of bridges at night. Travelers who laid their cloaks on the stone knew they were never alone for long. A shadow might appear at the far end, pacing slow. A figure might sit without speaking, waiting, testing patience. Some approached openly, asking to share food or fire. Others drifted nearer without words, studying, weighing whether the resting travelers were worth troubling. For the weary, this created a cruel balance. To welcome company risked exposure, to reject it risked defense. Either choice brought unease. The worst danger was not in numbers, but in uncertainty. A single stranger beneath an arch might be nothing more than another soul in need of rest. Yet the same stranger could be the beginning of trouble, the scout for others waiting beyond sight. A smile could be honest, or it could be masked. A request for bread could be hunger, or it could be test. And in the dark, echoing space where stone magnified every sound, the truth was hard to judge. Some travelers tried to measure character quickly. They watched how a stranger held their belongings. Close to the body meant caution. Loose and careless meant either wealth or arrogance. They listened to how footsteps landed. Light meant stealth. Heavy meant weariness. They studied eyes in firelight. Darting suggested calculation. Steady suggested calm. Yet these measures were imperfect. Danger did not always wear its face plainly. A man who spoke warmly might strike when silence fell. A woman who wept for food might, by dawn, lead others to the sleeper's pack. Have you ever sat among people you did not know and felt the weight of wondering which ones to trust? Beneath bridges, that weight grew heavier, for the cost of guessing wrong was not embarrassment, but loss. Some travelers avoided the risk entirely, moving on even when weary, refusing to rest where others already lingered. But exhaustion often forced choices. And so, beneath stone arches, strangers gathered side by side, each pretending comfort while measuring the other's every move. The danger of lingering strangers grew sharper when groups formed. A band of ewes laughing too loudly, a pair of men whispering too closely, a company of wanderers stretching their space. Each presence turned a bridge into contested ground. To lie down among them was to become part of their circle, whether one wished it or not, and those circles could close quickly. Bread was demanded, coins were borrowed, stories were pressed. To refuse was to seem proud, to accept was to seem weak. Neither path offered rest. Some travelers learned to carry tokens that discouraged attention. A staff worn smooth by use suggested strength. A cloak patched many times suggested poverty, making one less attractive to thieves. A scar on the face suggested battle survived, warning off those who sought easy prey. Appearances became shields, though not always reliable. A cloak too poor suggested weakness. A staff too fine suggested wealth. Strangers beneath bridges studied such details as carefully as they studied faces. Silence, too, was dangerous. A sleeper pretending to ignore others might be seen as aloof, even hostile. But speaking too much revealed details better kept hidden. Where one had come from, where one was going, what goods lay in the bag. Even a careless mention of a destination could mark a traveler for pursuit. Have you ever spoken without thought and later wished you had said less? On the road, words carried weight, and under bridges they carried risk. Some bridges gained reputations over time. Villagers whispered warnings. Do not rest beneath that arch. Too many eyes linger there. Others carried memories of thefts or disappearances, making travelers avoid them altogether. Yet in desperate weather, even these places filled. Rain, wind, and exhaustion drove people to gamble against the very dangers they feared. And the strangers already waiting gained advantage, for desperation made caution weaker. The greatest unease came when strangers lingered without speaking, a figure sitting in shadow, neither approaching nor leaving, unsettled even the bravest. Was he resting? Was he waiting? Was he watching? Travelers told of long nights when they dared not sleep, eyes fixed on such figures until dawn. Nothing happened, yet the fear itself gnawed at strength. And perhaps that was the true danger, not action, but the slow erosion of trust, the draining of rest, the weight of never knowing. Those who survived many journeys spoke softly of these lessons. They said the hardest part of the road was not the distance, nor the hunger, nor even the storms. It was the people one met in places half-hidden, where stone and shadow concealed more than they revealed. Bridges were among the worst of these. They offered shelter, but they also gathered strangers. And strangers in the stillness of night could be either friend or foe, but never known until it was too late. So the weary learned to listen closely, to watch quietly, to rest lightly. They learned that a bridge gave as much danger as it gave comfort. And when a shadow lingered too long beneath its arch, they knew the truth. The enemy was not the stone above or the water below, but the uncertainty of the people who chose to wait in the same dark space. Have you ever stood under a vaulted ceiling and noticed how even the smallest sound seemed to echo and return to you, louder than expected? A cough becomes a clap, a footstep doubles in weight. Even the whisper of cloth turning can feel as though it belongs to someone else. Bridges, with their heavy arches of stone or timber, carried this same strange power. To those who chose to sleep beneath them, it was not the silence that unsettled most, but the noise. For in those places the stones themselves seemed to speak, and often They spoke too loudly. The echo was the first surprise for many travelers. A lone wanderer sitting down to unwrap bread might tear it in half and hear the sound repeat itself, bouncing from one wall to the other. The drip of water from the arch above seemed multiplied, as though many drops fell instead of one. A yawn became an announcement, carrying outward into the night. Have you ever dropped a pebble into a still pond and watched ripples spread far wider than the stone itself? Noise beneath bridges behaved the same way, a single act creating circles of sound larger than intended. This mattered most at night. When a traveler tried to rest, every small adjustment, the shifting of a pack, the creak of a belt, the sigh of a tired chest, seemed magnified. Companions, already uneasy, often misheard these echoes as something else. A small scratch against stone might sound like a step. The call of an owl above might transform into a whisper carried down the arch. A snore might seem like a growl. And so rest beneath a bridge rarely came easily, for the stones betrayed peace at every chance. But echoes carried another risk, greater than mere discomfort. They traveled outward. The sound of breaking bread or pouring water did not stop at the arches. It spilled into the open, along the bank, across the field. Strangers nearby, ears tuned by silence, could hear long before they saw, and the bridge, with its strange acoustics, made it difficult to tell direction. A listener could know that someone rested beneath the arch without knowing exactly where. For the sleeper, that was worse than silence. It meant being known without knowing in return. Travelers who understood this danger adapted. They moved with care, chewing slowly, breaking food beneath claw, keeping tools wrapped in fabric to dull their clinks. They spoke less, or not at all, when eating in those places. Some even preferred to eat outside the bridge, in open fields, where sound carried honestly, rather than bouncing strangely. Then, when their hunger was satisfied, they returned to the arch for cover, but fatigue often overruled caution. Too tired to move twice, many ate and slept in the same hollow, their noises telling the night more than their eyes could. Even natural sounds became threatening beneath bridges. Rivers lapped at stones, their splashes multiplied into constant whispers. Rats scurried in cracks, their claws scratching as though many paws worked together. Birds nesting overhead stirred, their wings echoing as though larger creatures passed. To sleep there was to enter a world where nothing sounded as it was, where every small motion became another story. And stories, when misunderstood, bred fear. Have you ever lain in bed at night and thought you heard a sound in the corner, only to realize later it was the settling of wood or the rustle of fabric? Multiply that unease by stone and water, and you will know the feeling of bridges. Travelers startled themselves awake again and again, hearts racing, convinced danger stood nearby. Often it was only their own movement returned to them, but the mind did not always accept that answer, and fear wore them thin. Groups suffered in their own way. Companions lying together beneath an arch often blamed one another for noises they did not make. One accused another of stirring, another accused the first of whispering in sleep. Quarrels rose, patience thinned. The echo divided them as surely as it confused them, and when actual danger approached, they sometimes ignored it, believing it was only another false sound. The stones, by speaking too loudly, dulled their ability to hear what truly mattered. Some bridges gained reputations not for thieves or floods, but for their noise. Travelers said that under certain arches the river sounded like voices, or footsteps echoed long after they had ended. These tales, told again and again, gave such places a haunted reputation. Yet in truth, it was only the strange physics of stone and air. The real danger lay not in spirits, but in confusion. And confusion on the road could be as deadly as any blade. Those who managed to sleep there did so only by training themselves. They learned to expect echoes, to accept them, to treat them as part of the night's rhythm. They reminded themselves each time a noise startled them that it was most likely their own breath, their own motion, their own belongings shifting. Yet even the most seasoned admitted that the mind, weary and half-dreaming, often forgot such logic. Fear lived in echoes, and echoes were everywhere. So the lesson was passed along the road. Bridges sheltered the body, but unsettled the senses. They magnified what should be small, they confused what should be clear, they betrayed what should remain private. And though their arches seemed strong and silent, their stones never truly kept quiet. They spoke too loudly, too oft, and always at the wrong time. Have you ever struck a match or lit a small flame in the dark and noticed how quickly it becomes the brightest thing around? In daylight, fire is modest, one glow among many. But at night, especially under stone arches where shadows already gather, even the smallest flame seems immense. For weary travelers, fire beneath a bridge offered warmth, light, and the chance to cook food or dry clothing. Yet what promised comfort often betrayed them, for fire was a signal that could not be hidden, and every meal taken by its glow invited danger. Hello again, and thank you for journeying this far with me. If these quiet histories bring you calm and curiosity, I gently remind you to subscribe so these long stories can keep accompanying your nights. Travelers who stopped beneath bridges often felt an irresistible pull to make fire. The stone above shielded smoke from rain, the arch cut wind so flames burned steadier, and the reflection of light made the space seem larger, safer. Imagine arriving drenched after hours of rain, your cloak heavy, your fingers stiff. Would you not crave the spark of heat against cold stone? Many gave in to that craving, and for a time they felt secure. But fire changed the balance. Beneath a bridge, its glow shone against water, doubling itself in reflection. Its smoke curled upward, slipping through cracks to drift into the open air above. Its crackle carried louder than footsteps, echoing under the vault. Even if one sat in silence, the fire spoke for them. Have you ever seen a lantern flicker across a hillside and found your eyes drawn instantly? Fire beneath a bridge was the same, a beacon against darkness, calling to whoever cared to look. The first danger was visibility. Those crossing above often glanced down, curious about the flicker beneath. Some were harmless, others not. A merchant might pass without care, but a thief might mark the spot for later return. Even those with no ewe will sometimes spread word. Travelers rest under the bridge tonight, and word traveled quickly on the road, rarely for the sleeper's benefit. The second danger was smell. Cooking over fire carried scents far beyond what one imagined. Bread toasting, broth simmering, herbs steeping, these were invitations to any nose in range. Hungry wanderers followed them. Animals did too. Stray dogs, foxes, Even wolves were drawn by the promise of scraps. What felt like nourishment to the sleeper became signal to the world. Fire also lulled the body. Its warmth made eyelids heavy, its glow softened vigilance, its rhythm of sparks hypnotized. Groups laughed louder around it, feeling falsely secure, their voices echoing outward. Guards forgot their watch. A lone traveler leaned too close, lost in thought, forgetting that shadows beyond the fire's circle grew darker still. Have you ever sat before flames and found your thoughts wandering until time slipped by unnoticed? Travelers beneath bridges lived that danger multiplied, for their wandering left them open. Some tried to hide their flames. They dug pits, ringed fires with stones, or shielded them with cloaks. Yet concealment was imperfect. Smoke betrayed even hidden embers, curling into night air where it did not belong. Sparks leapt upward, flashing briefly against the arch, and the reflection on the water gave them away, brighter even than the fire itself. What one thought buried often shone twice as far. The greatest betrayal came when travelers trusted fire too much. Believing its light enough, they ignored sounds of shifting stones. Believing its warmth secure, they unbuckled belts, removed boots, loosened cloaks. And when danger arrived, footsteps from the back, shadows at the arch's edge, they were slower to rise, slower to react, slower to protect what mattered. Fire had given them comfort, but comfort dulled their edge. Stories spread of those who suffered for it. A pair once roasted meat beneath a bridge, their laughter loud, their fire strong. Passers-by above heard, descended, and found them unaware. Their meal was stolen, their packs taken, their night ruined. Another tale told of a family who lit too large a fire, only to have villagers mistake it for danger to the bridge itself. They were driven away not by thieves, but by angry townsfolk, fearing damage to the crossing. In both cases, the fire betrayed them, not because it was wrong, but because it revealed too much. And yet, travelers returned to fire again and again. For how could they not? Without it, the night was colder, the food plainer, the silence heavier. Fire gave the illusion of home, even if for an hour. It reminded the weary that warmth still existed in a world that often felt unfriendly. And so they risked it, balancing the gift against the cost, knowing that every spark carried risk, but also knowing that sometimes risk was the only way to endure. The lesson was not to abandon fire, but to respect it, to build it small, to feed it lightly, to shield it as best as one could, to eat quickly and let it die before sleep, leaving only faint coals that no stranger would notice. Travelers learned to treat flame as both ally and traitor, useful, but never fully trustworthy, because under bridges the danger was never the fire alone. It was what the fire revealed, and every time a traveler lit one, they accepted the truth. Warmth and risk are twins, and to have one is always to invite the other. Have you ever tried to fall asleep in a place that seemed alive with sounds you could not name? A creak here, a drip there, the shuffle of something unseen, all weaving into a rhythm that never quite lets you rest? Beneath bridges, travelers knew this feeling well. Even when the night was calm and no stranger lingered nearby, the arches themselves became restless companions, filling the darkness with noises that seemed too close, too sharp, too uncertain. To those lying on the cold ground with cloaks pulled tight, sleep was less a comfort and more a fragile bargain with the world of echoes. The bridge was not a quiet shelter. Its stone or timber carried every tremor of the road above. Hooves rang out like bells, wheels rattled like thunder, footsteps struck with doubled force, and each sound traveled downward through the structure into the ears of the sleepers. A rider passing overhead in the middle of the night might wake every soul beneath, their dreams scattered by the pounding of hooves. Even the weight of a cart, slow and steady, made the arch groan in protest, as though the very stones were complaining. Have you ever lain in bed and thought you heard footsteps in the hall, only to discover later it was the house settling? Imagine that sensation repeated endlessly with no certainty of truth. Beneath bridges, echoes blurred the line between real and imagined. A scratch might be a rat, or it might be the shifting of wood. A thump might be a stone falling, or it might be a stranger's approach. Travelers often jolted awake again and again, never sure if the danger was outside or only in their own ears. Water played its part, too. Rivers beneath bridges were not silent companions. They splashed against supports, hissed through cracks, lapped in uneven rhythms. A sudden gust of wind upstream could change their song, making them roar louder or gurgle strangely. Sleepers heard these shifts as threats, believing the river was rising, that flood was near, that danger crept closer. Even when the water remained steady, its endless murmur drilled into dreams, turning rest into unease. Companions learned quickly that noise carried arguments with it. One accused another of shifting too often, of sighing too loudly, of stirring embers in the night. Patience, worn thin by exhaustion, snapped easily under such echoes. Quarrels rose where silence should have soothed. And when actual threats drew near, travelers sometimes mistook them for yet another false alarm, their senses dulled by endless confusion. More than one story told of sleepers robbed, not by clever thieves, but by the simple trick of sound overwhelming sense. Animals added to the chorus. Birds roosting in cracks rustled feathers, their wings amplified into sudden rushes. Rats gnawed wood, their small bites echoing like loud scrapes. Dogs prowled the banks, their paws crunching gravel louder than seemed possible. Even frogs croaking in the reeds made sleepers turn uneasily, their voices multiplied by the bridge's hollow belly. The world seemed to mock rest, every small sound made larger, every echo stretched beyond its origin. The greatest burden of echoes was fear. When the mind cannot name a noise, it fills the gap with imagination. Have you ever been alone in darkness and convinced yourself that a sound was closer than it was? Travelers beneath bridges lived that doubt nightly. A twig snapping far away became a step at the arch's edge. The groan of a beam became the whisper of a stranger. The drip of water became a stealthy hand reaching near. And though reason argued otherwise, the heart believed the worst. Some tried to fight this unease. They placed stones in small piles, so if disturbed they would scatter loudly and give true warning. They tied bells to packs, not as charms but as signals. They trained themselves to breathe evenly, to accept sounds as part of the night's rhythm. But few mastered this discipline fully. Exhaustion always won, and when it did, dreams carried the echoes into strange shapes, voices where none spoke, steps where none walked, cries where none lived. Sleep itself became another form of unrest. Stories spread along the roads of bridges where no one slept soundly. They said that arches remembered every noise ever made beneath them, and at night they repeated them, whispering back the steps of long-gone travelers. In truth, it was only acoustics, stone, and air working together, but the effect was the same. No one left such places rested. They left with eyes heavier, limbs weaker, hearts more suspicious of silence itself. And so travelers learned the hard lesson. Beneath bridges, sleep could not be trusted. Even when no thief prowled, no flood rose, no stranger lingered, the stones themselves betrayed rest. They spoke too often, too loudly, too strangely. And in their chorus of echoes, the weary discovered that danger did not always come with blade or claw. Sometimes it came with sound alone, stealing peace, one restless hour at a time. Have you ever tried to rest in a room where the walls seemed to press in, where every breath and every movement of another person felt magnified? Under bridges, travelers learned that space was more than a comfort. It was survival. Yet space was rarely abundant. Stone arches drew not just one wanderer, but many, and the need for shelter often forced strangers into close company. The dangers of this closeness were not always visible, but they were constant, woven into the very act of lying too near to someone you did not know. Bridges were magnets for the weary. Rain drove people beneath them. Winds pushed them into their hollows, and the promise of dry ground tempted every passer-by. But no bridge had room for all. Those who arrived late often found others already settled. Packs lay stretched against walls, cloaks spread across the driest ground, fire embers glowing faintly in corners. To lie down meant lying within reach of someone else. Have you ever shared a bench with a stranger and felt how even the smallest shift brushed too close? Now imagine that with your belongings, your food, your very body at stake. The first danger of sharing space too closely was theft. In the dim light of night, it was easy for a hand to drift toward another's pack, to loosen a strap, to slide a small item away. A sleeper, weary from walking, seldom noticed until dawn, and by then the thief was gone. Many travelers learned to sleep with their packs beneath their heads or tied to their arms, the strap looped around a wrist like a chain. Yet even then dreams were restless, for closeness made every movement suspect. The second danger was conflict. Too many people in too little space made quarrels inevitable. A cough disturbed one, a shuffle annoyed another, a boot brushed too close to a sleeping body. Voices rose, tempers flared, and what began as irritation often escalated into blows. Beneath a bridge, sound amplified disputes, making them seem larger than they were. Have you ever been woken by someone's careless noise and felt anger out of proportion to the act? That was nightly life beneath crowded arches, where patience wore thin in the press of bodies. Another risk lay in food. Shared space meant shared sense. If one traveler ate, the smell carried instantly to the rest. Hunger-sharpened eyes made gestures seem selfish, turned strangers into rivals. Some begged for a piece, others demanded it. Those who refused risked resentment. Those who gave risked losing too much. And once bread was passed, the balance shifted. Givers seemed weak, takers seemed bold, and distrust grew. What was meant as nourishment became a spark for unease. Illness, too, spread easily. Close quarters turned coughs into threats, sneezes into warnings. A single fevered body beneath an arch could leave many weakened days later. In times when remedies were scarce and medicine uncertain, this risk loomed larger than blades. Have you ever sat too near someone coughing and felt the instinct to lean away? Travelers beneath bridges could not lean away. They shared air, warmth, and danger alike. But perhaps the deepest danger was not in theft, quarrel, or illness. It was in the erosion of trust. To sleep inches from a stranger was to surrender more than comfort. It was to admit vulnerability. Every breath could be heard, every motion seen. Have you ever tried to rest while feeling someone's eyes on you, even if you were not sure they watched? That unease lived with every traveler forced into closeness. Sleep became shallow, conversations careful, laughter hollow. No one truly rested when another lay too near. Companions who traveled together suffered differently. Friends or families crowded under arches, quarreled, not with suspicion, but with pressure. Whose turn was it to guard? Who had taken the better space? Whose boots blocked the way? Even bonds frayed when walls pressed in. And once frayed, they did not mend easily. The road was long and grudges heavy. A harsh word spoken beneath a bridge could echo for days, making each step harder. Some sought solutions. They placed stones to mark boundaries, each person claiming a small patch. They arranged belongings like walls, dividing space with cloaks or staffs. They agreed upon watches, not only for safety against outsiders, but for peace among themselves. Yet even these measures rarely eased tension fully. Closeness carried its own risks, and no mark on the ground could erase the truth that too many bodies lay in too small a place. Stories spread of bridges remembered not for floods or thieves, but for fights beneath them. A man once refused to move his pack, sparking a quarrel that ended with knives drawn. Another tale told of two families forced to share an arch during storm, who emerged the next day not as neighbors, but as enemies. Such stories grew with each retelling, reminding all who heard them that closeness under bridges was never harmless. And so the lesson passed from traveler to traveler. Space was not merely comfort, it was defense. To share it too closely was to risk not only possessions, but peace of mind. Bridges gave shelter, yes, but shelter shared too tightly could turn safety into danger. For under those arches, with the walls pressed sound and bodies together, the greatest enemy was not the cold or the river or the dark. It was the simple fact that strangers too near could never be strangers for long, and closeness in the wrong night was more dangerous than distance. Have you ever lain down in one place and felt the weight of another world just above your head? A ceiling of footsteps, a roof of voices, the steady reminder that life moved on while you tried to rest. For those who slept under bridges, this feeling was constant. The world above never truly slept, and its movements pressed downward, turning every attempt at rest into a struggle against sound, weight, and worry. Bridges were meant for passage. Wagons rolled across them, hooves clattered, boots struck rhythmically. Even at night, there was rarely perfect stillness. A lone rider crossing at midnight sent echoes thundering down to those below. A trader's cart, heavy with goods, rattled like a storm. Have you ever tried to sleep near a road and been startled awake by a passing carriage? Imagine that multiplied, the sound forced downward, magnified by stone, repeated until sleep itself felt impossible. The watch above was not only noise but presence. Travelers lying beneath could not help But imagine who walked above them. Was it a farmer hurrying home? A band of youths wandering after dusk? Soldiers on patrol? Or worse, thieves who paused at the railing, glancing down, wondering if shadows beneath hid easy prey. The bridge connected both worlds, the open path above and the hidden hollow below. And sleepers knew that those above often noticed those below. That knowledge was weight enough to keep eyes half open. Sometimes the watch above was real. Strangers leaned over, peering into darkness, voices low, laughter carrying. A torch might flare, spilling light into the arch. The sound of hushed conversation told the sleepers clearly they were seen. Have you ever pretended to rest while knowing you were being observed? Beneath bridges, such moments stretched endlessly, hearts pounding while bodies lay still, waiting to see if the watchers would move on or come down. At other times, the watch above was only imagined. Echoes of footsteps seemed to circle, to pause, to linger longer than they should. The mind, weary and suspicious, filled in details. Someone was waiting, someone was listening, someone was planning. Even when no figure leaned over, the fear of unseen eyes pressed down as heavily as stone itself. And in truth, the difference mattered little, for imagined watchfulness robbed rest as thoroughly as real. The danger of the watch above was more than fear. It was interruption. A traveler drifting into sleep might jolt awake at each passing sound, never fully sinking into rest. Dreams remained shallow, limbs remained stiff. Come morning, they rose as weary as before, their strength not replenished. On the road, exhaustion was as dangerous as hunger or thirst. A body too tired stumbled, made poor choices, missed small warnings. And so the watch above became not only a matter of suspicion, but of survival. Groups learned to cope by setting shifts of watch below to mirror those above. One companion remained awake, eyes on the archway, ears tuned for voices overhead. This gave others comfort, yet the duty was heavy, for echoes confused even the most careful listener. Was that the sound of hooves miles away, or boots just above? Did the silence mean emptiness, or did it mean someone waiting quietly? The one who kept watch rarely knew. By dawn, their nerves frayed, their body colder, they too were exhausted. Sometimes the watch above turned openly hostile. Stories told of men tossing stones or waist down onto sleepers, driving them away. Others spoke of thieves who used the vantage point to count belongings before descending at the right moment. And though not all tales were true, their telling spread caution. Every bridge was judged by its safety above as much as below, and many travelers passed by good shelter simply because they feared unseen eyes. Yet not every presence above was enemy. Some were curious children, leaning too far over railings to glimpse shadows. Some were shepherds crossing late, sparing no thought for the figures resting below. A few were fellow wanderers choosing the upper path, but glancing kindly downward. Still, those below never knew which face belonged to which intent, and the uncertainty gnawed at trust. Have you ever sat in a public place and wondered if the glance of a passerby carried judgment or indifference? Under bridges, that question never ceased. Sleepers felt both exposed and invisible, both seen and disregarded. It was an uneasy balance, and one that weighed heavier the longer one lay awake listening. In time, seasoned travelers carried advice. Never choose a bridge too close to a town, for the watch above was constant. Never lie directly beneath the center, where footsteps struck loudest. Rest near the edges, where shadows hid better, where exits were closer, and never trust silence, for silence above was not the same as safety. So it was that bridges, meant as connections of land and life, became barriers to rest. Those above walked freely, unaware of the unease they caused. Those below tried to sleep, burdened by the suspicion that every step overhead might turn toward them. And in this endless balance of watchers and watched, sleep was broken again and again, not by flood, not by thieves, but by the simple fact that the world above never stopped moving, and its weight pressed always upon the weary below. Have you ever lain awake in the dark and thought you heard voices, though no one was near? A murmur carried on the wind, a word half-formed by moving water, a whisper that might have been your own imagination. Beneath bridges, travelers lived this unease often, for at night the arches did not merely echo footsteps or magnified drips of water. They shaped sounds into whispers, half real and half feared, and whether those whispers came from strangers, animals, or nothing at all, they unsettled sleep more deeply than silence ever could. The stone belly of a bridge was a place of distortion. A cough from one end became a mutter in the middle. A shift of clothing near the wall sounded like someone leaning close. Even the scrape of rats in cracks resembled hurried words. Have you ever misheard a phrase in a crowded room and believed, for a moment, someone spoke directly to you? That sensation was magnified at night under arches, when every noise seemed intent, every echo deliberate. Sometimes the whispers were real. Travelers in groups spoke softly to one another, hoping not to wake others. Their words drifted across the hollow, broken and repeated, until they seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Strangers passing on the road above let their voices spill down through gaps, the sentences distorted by stone until they sounded like secrets told in another tongue. Even wind through cracks played tricks, making hollow sighs that stirred unease. The greatest danger was not the whispers themselves, but what they inspired. The mind, weary and cautious, filled gaps with fear. A phrase half heard might be taken as threat, a murmur mistaken for plotting, a hushed laugh believed to be mockery. Have you ever woken from a dream with your heart racing, convinced that the dream was still real? Whispers beneath bridges created that feeling, even in waking hours. Companions sometimes grew suspicious of each other, convinced that one whispered while the others slept. Arguments followed, each denying, each accusing, patience strained. In some tales, suspicion grew so deep that friendships ended, broken not by betrayal, but by the echo of imagined words. The arch, by bending sound, bent trust as well. But worse still were the nights when whispers truly belonged to outsiders. Strangers creeping near, thinking themselves hidden, forgot that stone magnified every secret. Travelers lying still could hear them plotting, counting, deciding whether to approach. Few dangers chilled more than hearing voices you could not see. To rise and flee risked confrontation. To stay risked worse. Many chose silence, hearts pounding, praying the whispers would drift away. Even nature contributed. Frogs croaked in broken rhythms that mimicked speech. Water rushed against supports, making syllables in its splash. Birds stirred above, their calls fractured into eerie notes. sleepers told stories of arches that spoke all night long, muttering in endless tongues. Though the truth was only sound and stone, the effect drained the spirit as surely as hunger. Have you ever tried to rest while a song played faintly in another room, too soft to understand, but too steady to ignore? Beneath bridges, whispers were that song, always present, never clear, impossible to escape. They gnawed at the mind until every shadow seemed alive, every silence seemed staged, every moment of rest seemed undeserved. And yet, for all their danger, whispers sometimes saved lives. A traveler once awoke to faint murmurs and, listening closely, realized they belonged to thieves preparing to descend. He woke his companions, and they fled before trouble found them. Another story told of whispers mistaken for voices, only to discover the river rising instead. The warning was enough for sleepers to climb higher before flood arrived. Even the most unsettling sounds carried fragments of protection if one had the courage to hear them clearly. But most often, whispers beneath bridges robbed sleep without giving warning. They frayed nerves, weakened trust, and left bodies heavier come morning. And in a world where each step required strength, that loss of rest was itself a danger. Hello again. If you've stayed with me through these quiet hours of history, I gently remind you once more to subscribe. These stories may be long, but like the whispers under bridges, they return night after night, keeping the past alive in calm voices for your evenings. Travelers passed on their lessons. Do not listen too hard, for whispers grow louder when chased. Do not try to answer them, for echoes only mock. And above all, remember that most sounds beneath bridges belong to the world itself, not to enemies. Yet even as these lessons spread, the fear remained. For in the heart of night, when shadows thickened and exhaustion pressed, the line between real voices and imagined ones grew too thin to follow. So the whispers remained part of the journey. They haunted dreams, stirred quarrels, and sharpened fear. And those who lay beneath arches carried the memory long after they left, recalling not the stone or the river or the road above, but the uneasy truth that sometimes the night itself seemed to speak. Have you ever reached the end of a long journey and looked back at the places that carried you through? Not the open roads, nor the welcoming inns, but the shadows where you rested when no other shelter waited. For many travelers of the past, those shadows belonged to bridges. Their arches, damp and echoing, became unwilling companions across countless nights. And though each experience beneath them was different, some marked by rain, some by fear, some by fragile peace, all carried the same truth. Sleeping under bridges was never as safe as it seemed. On this final night, imagine a lone traveler reaching a bridge just as dusk deepens. The road has been long, and the body aches with fatigue. The river hums below. The stone arches promise a roof, and the ground, though cold, is dry. Every instinct calls for rest, and so the traveler lays down, knowing what others have known before. This place offers both shelter and threat, gift and trap. The night begins with echoes. Boots above strike stone, carts rumble past, voices drift downward. Each sound feels closer than it is, turning rest into an act of endurance. Yet slowly weariness dulls suspicion. The body surrenders inch by inch, despite the mind's protest. Sleep, fragile and uneasy, hovers like a bird uncertain of where to land. Then comes the river's voice. Its lapping against supports sounds like words half spoken. A rush of wind upstream deepens its tone, making it roar briefly before calming. The traveler shifts, cloak pulled tighter, wondering whether the water has risen or whether it only sings differently tonight. Fear sharpens for a moment, then fades back into half-dreams. But no night beneath a bridge is free of others. Strangers arrive, shadows settling near. They do not speak, or if they do, their words are carried strangely by the arch, broken into fragments. The traveler keeps still, eyes closed, listening harder than sleeping. Every shuffle feels near, every sigh feels directed. Trust is impossible, but exhaustion leaves no choice. The eyes close again, not in peace, but in surrender. A fire sparks nearby, small and carefully tended. Its glow flickers against stone, casting shapes that move more than they should. The warmth tempts, but the risk gnaws. Fire is beacon as much as comfort, and the traveler knows it. Still, the flame remains, and its crackle mingles with river and echo until all sounds blur into one restless song. Hours pass. Animals stir. A fox padding along the bank, rats skittering through cracks, birds shifting in their nests above. Their movements echo like whispers, too close, too human. Sleep fractures, returning in fragments rather than stretches. Dreams and reality weave together. A voice may be a stranger, or only the river. A hand reaching near may be real, or only the cloak sliding. And then dawn comes, not with silence, but with new sounds. Hooves strike above, louder than ever. A cart rattles past, its wheels shaking dust from the stone. Light filters in, thin at first, then brightening. The shadows retreat, and the dangers with them. The traveler rises, cloak damp, limbs stiff, heart heavy with the unease of a night never fully restful. But something has been learned. The bridge gave shelter, yes, but it demanded a price. Suspicion, tension, sleepless hours. And like countless others before, the traveler carries that memory forward. It is a lesson that will not fade, that safety is rarely whole, that shelter often hides risk, that the road demands more than endurance of distance. It demands endurance of unease. Have you ever looked at an ordinary structure, a bridge of stone or wood, and wondered about the countless lives it touched, not in glory but in fatigue? Beneath those arches lay stories of hunger, of fear, of survival. Each night under them became part of a larger truth, that travel was not only about reaching places, but about enduring the nights in between. And so the final night beneath the arches closes not with rest, but with resilience. For though bridges spoke too loudly, though rivers betrayed, though strangers lingered and fire revealed, still travelers rose each dawn, shouldered their packs, and stepped once more onto the road. That, in the end, was the greatest story beneath every bridge, not comfort, but endurance.